Hello, my name is Carla Luguetti, and it's a pleasure to be here presenting to you a paper called A Transformative Learning Journey of a Researcher in Experiencing Participatory Action Research. So the inspiration for this article emerged from my experience in trying to apply a participatory action research in a new country. I am originally from Brazil, and at the time of writing this paper, I am a lecturer in health and physical education in Australia. And when I started in academia, I had no idea how engaging in participatory action research would, become part of who I am as an educator. And that is why I'm continually in this process of being and becoming and reflecting in terms of my learning journey in learning an activist participatory action research approach. Uh, in this specific paper, I'm presenting the moments, particularly the moments in which I change my beliefs and perspectives about young people and participatory action research. Particularly, I am using uh, an activist approach. So, an activist approach was the way, my methodology to design the participatory action research. And the whole process, reflective process, started 8 years ago during my PhD. And I've been, having weekly meetings with my supervisor since then. And in this article, we explore how I change in these 8 years and how I have experienced this activist approach that's based on young people's voice. In terms of methodology, I employ critical ethnography as the methodology to think about my own experiences. Particularly in terms of methodology, we use an activist approach, as I mentioned, that's grounded in feminist theories such as Gloria Anzaldúa, Michelle Fine, and Bell Hooks, and critical pedagogies, particularly Paulo Freire critical pedagogy. And we use student-centered inquiries curriculum as a way to work with young people, and this approach emerged from 24 years of experience in work with marginalized young people in physical education settings, where the main idea it is to invite, young people to co-create curriculum or sport programs with us, and of course they better meet their needs and interests and so on. So in terms of aim, using Paulo Freire's concept and also Black and Chicana feminists as the lens to this study, we want to explore my learning trajectory in enacting an activist approach based on young people's voice. And of course, using participatory action research in this process. It is important that critical autoethnography focus on power, culture, and social process and how people navigating those systems. So it's different than traditional autoethnography because focus on power, issues of power and systems of domination, and that's what I aim to explain to you today. In terms of participants, I am, of course, the participant in that study. As a Brazilian physical education teacher educator, teaching health and physical education in Australia, located in Australia, in a university located in Australia. I always consider myself as the other or someone who represents diversity. In Australia, I always say that I'm the third old woman living in Australia. And since my childhood, I always remembered, for example, in my childhood and the economic difficulties we face. I used to live in a socially vulnerable area, and I grew up playing soccer and flying kites with friends who lived in favelas. Favelas are Brazilian slums, so in socially vulnerable areas, they are pretty common. And I came from, a diverse group, and that's why I consider myself the other. In terms of methodology, so in the last 80 years, I'm facilitating participatory action research in Brazil, United States during my postdoc, and also Australia. And as you can see, in the first study I developed in Brazil, the second one was in the US when I was doing my postdoc. Then I came back to Brazil and I developed another participatory action research. And now in Australia, I've been working with two groups, in a non-governmental organization, in an NGO, working with refugee background young people, and also in my physical education, teacher education course. So working with student teachers and how can we help them to learn an approach that's based on young people's voice. In terms of how I designed this study, so as I mentioned, I had always weekly meetings with my supervisor, and that was since my PhD that I started in 2012. But in order to write this specific paper, we had 5 online meetings, 1 hour meeting, where we discuss, my learning trajectory in those phases, as you can see. So first phase during my PhD, and how I particularly change my beliefs about young people. Then in the second phase, my postdoc, and how I change my perspective, in particularly about how can we translate, social change and activist approach to physical education, teacher education context. Then in phase 3, how I apply all this knowledge that I was learning, during my PhD and postdoc in a physical education program in Brazil, and how I changed my beliefs in terms of the student teachers I was working with, and finally in Australia, and like getting this full-time job, and how I am experiencing the activist approach and participatory action research as the possibility to challenge neoliberal systems. In terms of the results, so the first important point was finding ways to work that align with my beliefs. So I always, as I said, I consider myself as the other. So I was always finding spaces or create spaces for social change, in particularly young people from socially vulnerable areas. That was what I was working my PhD. And research emerged as the possibility for social transformation. So in my PhD, I want to create those spaces. However, a pivotal moment in my learning journey was when I realized that I was not valuing young people's voice as I should value in this kind of work. So I was valuing adults' knowledge, theory, more than young people's knowledge. So it took me a while, and particularly 11 weeks, where I was working with young people for the first time, to realize that they have the knowledge. And I said, oh my God, the kids have the knowledge after 11 sessions. And that was important, a pivotal moment when I realized the importance of valuing young people's voice. In 2015, 2016, I did my postdoc with Kim in US, and a pivotal moment that emerged in this experience was when I start to see gender inequalities in my pedagogical practice. So until then, I was not realizing the gender inequalities. And then suddenly when Kim was observing me teaching in a school sport club, and she started to count how many, times the boys was touching they were touching the boy and girls, and she realized that we had, for example, 32 versus 10 times. And when in our weekly meetings, she asked me if I was noticing anything, and I said no. So in that particular moment, when she showed me the data, I realized that I was reproducing gender inequalities. So that was a pivotal moment when I understood that, and I start to see gender in my day-to-day pedagogical practice. In 2016, I went back to Brazil and I started to implement all those ideas in my physical education, teacher education programs. I was working in a university. We opened the doors and received a lot of kids, as you can see in the pictures, interest to participate in a sport program we call sport and empowerment. And a pivotal moment that emerged was when I realized that I wanted my student teachers to be where I was. So I was really impatient because they were not, getting this approach. So in the first 6 months, I was teaching and they were observing me. And then, in the next semester, they were leading the activities and I could not see how, they were listening and responding a kid's voice. And I was so frustrated because of that. So that was a pivotal moment because I had to be patient in understanding that the same issues that I face, so the fact that the activist approach was not natural for my student teachers is pretty much the same that was not natural for myself. So I had to understand the struggles to prepare students, teachers to, to work in this kind of ways. Then, when I arrived in Australia, I think a pivotal moment was design a unit called Adolescent Health, as you can see in the pictures, a unit where we had a partnership. We have a partnership with a school, a secondary school close to the university. We listen to the kids' voice and we prepare a health expo, based on their voice to respond to their voices and concerns. So we had 2 field trips, and it's a great project, a partnership with a school close to our university. However, a pivotal moment was when I understand my struggles to work in a neoliberal system, particularly the effects of this neoliberal system in my students' desire. So, for example, I had to understand that most of them would say, Carla, what can I do to pass your unit? And that was pretty much a consequence of their whole educational system. I had to understand that this neoliberal context and not understanding this context let me blame my students for not valuing my unit. So I had to learn to understand that my students were expecting a banking concept of education much more than, some kind of unit where we would learn skills, important skills for their lives. So understanding the new liberal system helped me and was a pivotal moment in this specific time. So finally, in terms of future directions, I believe this study guides us to continue to, understanding physical education, teacher education, learning, educators' learning trajectories in enacting activist approach, or any kind of approach that is articulate with the idea of social change. We also conclude that the teacher's transformations happen in action, and that's why it's important for teacher educators engaging ongoing actions and reflection with their students, and also having the kind of structural support in that process. I believe, my supervisor, Kim Oliver, she was an important, she was all the time helping me in this process of reflecting on my learning trajectory in this last 8 years. So I think it would be interesting to understand how can we, helping student teachers and teacher educators to understand the barriers and the struggles they face in their process of becoming a teacher, educator, or an educator. Thank you.